Hey, welcome to the 12th House. I'm Michelle Pelizon, your host and the head witch in charge here at Holisticism. Delighted to have you here with us. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. Hi, TikTokers. Hi, Instagram. Hi, YouTube people. We are on the internet lately quite a bit, and I'm so happy that you're here and you're trying out our podcast. I know it's like kind of a lot to dedicate your listening hours to somebody when we're used to like 30 seconds of video. So I appreciate that you're here. And a little context, if you're brand new to the podcast or you've been here for a while but haven't really heard us talk about our thesis of what this thing's about, the 12th house is a house in astrology. It's the last house in the wheel, and the 12th house represents the unseen. It represents the threshold, the space, the liminal space between life and death. And the 12th house also represents a lot of things that are scary: shadow, death, psychic abilities, the unknown. And a lot of the time in astrology, the 12th house gets a bad rap. So funny, actually. One of my cousins, so I'm Italian. I have a lot of cousins. A lot of cousins. And one of my cousins texted me yesterday, and he's a year younger than me. And I love him. He is the kindest, sweetest person. Just, wait till you hear his chart. You'll get it. And he has lived a life. He is just so inspiring to me. And he texted me and was like, hey, how do I look at my astrology big three? And I was like, who's the girl? Who is she? And what's her sign? And he was like, she's a Libra and she's great and awesome. I can't wait to meet her. She sounds lovely. So I gave him the Chani app and link to go look up his chart. And I was like, text me when you get your chart. So I want to read it for you. He was like, okay, great, because I don't understand it. So he sent it to me, and amongst many other things, he has a 12th house Cancer sun. And he was like, is that bad? Everything that I'm reading about the 12th house is that it's bad. And like, it's kind of scary. But then there's other things that say it's good. So like, what does it mean that my sun is there? It's like, no, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be there. And it's also intense, especially double water placement. That's why he and I get along. I'm a 8th house Pisces stellium. He's a 12th house Cancer sun. I mean, shit. Yeah. Anyways, I have a Pisces sun in the 8th house and a stellium there. So we get along. We get along well because, both of us, I was like, are you really psychic? And do you know things about people? And he was like, yes, I do. And we were talking about the 12th house and how it is this place of standing in between, right? That's what a threshold is, where you can look in both directions. You can see from both perspectives, but you're also it's not of this world and it's not of the other world. It is the in-between space, the liminal space, the threshold space. It can be alienating. And also the 12th house is a place that's really scary for a lot of people because it represents what we can't see. It represents darkness and shadow and things that are opaque and obscured, and that sometimes if we're not tethered, if we go too deep, we can't pull ourselves out. It reminds me of walking through the labyrinth or walking into the fog without awareness of your surroundings or without a line that's going to pull you back. And, the 12th house represents death. It represents psychic abilities. It represents the unknown, the unseen, the shadow world, the shadow self. And there's so much gold there. If we're brave enough and willing enough and we know ourselves well enough, we can trust ourselves to walk in those spaces. And that's what we wanted to talk about on the 12th house. We wanted to talk about all the shit that you can't talk about, the stuff that people don't want to see, the stuff that people don't want to acknowledge, not just in the spiritual world and those concepts, but also in business and in wellness, because man, oh man, is this a shadowy place sometimes. So I'm really excited for this series because it is so appropriate for the 12th house. We are beginning our, 5-week series on death. Ta-da! And I know. Listen, stay with me if you're like, no, I don't want the depression talk. We're not going to talk about that. It's not going to be depressing. I promise you. It's going to be really fun, says the Scorpio moon. But really, we're entering Scorpio season soon. It's spooky season. It's Halloween. What better time to talk about death and passing over and everything that the concept of death holds for us. I mean, we can't talk about everything, but we can talk about a lot of stuff like past life regression and death doula and all the things, right? And what happens to us when we die and what do we know? And we wanted to talk about death, of course, from a spiritual perspective, from a mystical perspective. And we also wanted to talk about death because it's a really important part and a natural part of a healthy business. We shy away from it, right? We assume that everything should be all growth all the time. Up, baby. Sky's the limit. Exponential growth, hockey stick shit, boss babing left and right. But what we don't acknowledge is that we have to cut off a lot of things. We have to kill a lot of things. A lot needs to die in order to grow. I mean, like, we talk about nature as the, like, ultimate baddie when we talk about Notion for magical baddies and we talk about building systems. And Notion is like the ecosystem master. Naturally, that's like where we get the term from, right? We build our own systems based off of an ecosystem. And the thing about nature is that there are no redundancies and there's no waste. And that's because when something dies, it fertilizes the ground and it helps other things grow. It gets poured back in to the ecosystem. That energy is not wasted. It is not lost. It is recycled. It's reused, right? And I think a lot of the time we're really scared to kill things off in our business, and we're scared to face death, to face an ending, even when something's going really well, to say, you know what, I think that we've reached the end of the line here. And I think that comes from grief and our lack of familiarity with what grief holds for us and the lessons that grief holds for us. Because we just aren't allowed to talk about death. In polite society, we ignore it. I mean, we have anti-aging, which is basically anti-living, right? It's anti-death, holding death as far away from us as humanly possible. So much of wellness is like keeping yourself as healthy as possible to live as long as possible. And listen, I'm not against that. I'm not saying that you should try to hasten your demise, but how much of what we do is because we are so afraid of dying and death and the end. And it's pretty obvious that part of the divinity of being alive is acknowledging that we're gonna die, right? Like, that's what makes this time so special. That's why when you came down from your alien spaceship and you're like, I know I'm omniscient. I've lived infinite lives. I understand the inner and outer universe systems and how everything works. But you know what? I'd really like to go try being a human. I feel like, there's something about the death thing that, how it's so quick. There's something there that I really want to experience. And so you popped down, you picked a little human meat suit to experience this life and to experience death. I mean, the womb is the threshold between life and death too. That's why death doulas, or doulas of any nature, they are those who usher us across a threshold. We got a lot of great guests coming up. I'm so excited for this series. I hope that you love it and enjoy it. And I'm pretty passionate about it, if you couldn't tell, because I think the main reason that I run Holisticism the way that I do, the reason that I care about intuitive business and why I care about the things that I care about, and I do things the way that I do them, a lot of it has to do with death. And I'm certainly not an expert in death. I'm certainly not like, chill, so super cool with death and dying, but it's been a great teacher. It's been a great, like a capital G great, not like, oh yeah, that's cool. No, it's been a great teacher in my life. And so has grief. Grief has been an incredible teacher in my life, and one teacher who keeps teaching me things. And I think about death a lot. I'm studying to be a death doula, and my teacher, Alua, is actually going to come on the podcast, so you'll hear from her in a couple weeks. But I think about death a lot, and the rites and rituals that death has, how spiritual, how sacred acknowledging life and death is, how important it is, how much we ignore it in modern life, because I've experienced a lot of death, and it was really traumatic and also like broke me open in so many ways at a time that I, in my early 20s, when I could like really wrestle with it. And I would argue that the reason I'm so spiritual is partially because of the grief that I experienced, and maybe partially because I was diagnosed with something like epilepsy at a kind of young age, and I had a doctor tell me like, you're going to, die in your sleep of a seizure. And that was a bit hyperbolic, I would guess, but also scary. And anyone who has had an illness, chronic illness, or who's dealt with terminal illness in their family or in their lives or with loved ones, you get it. It like changes the way that you do everything and how you see everything. And I think it's why I have a no asshole policy at Holisticism, and probably why I like things to be fun. Because like, what's the point? If we're not enjoying ourselves, or if we're not growing, like, what's the point? We are limited on our time. And so I'm not going to do things that I don't enjoy, that aren't helping me self-actualize. And also, my partner has brain cancer, and he has a tumor, and it's brain cancer, and his type of tumor will never be in remission. So sort of this thing that we hope it just, I'm crossing my fingers and I believe that it's just going to stay stable forever and we'll not have to worry about it. And he's probably going to outlive me, definitely going to outlive me. But it's something that we really seriously have to talk about, like often, because, we're getting married in a month, thinking about what our chosen family or, God willing, blood family will look like, what our lives will look like together. And death and the specter of death, the very real acknowledgement of death, is something that we talk about a lot. And while it might be, like a little bit more on the tip of our tongue than it might be on the tip of your tongue, it doesn't make it any less real for any of us. Like, death is personal for us all. It comes for us all. It's the great connector. And yet it is this thing that we are so afraid to talk about. So I'm really excited for this series. I've talked so much because I wanted to tee it up for you and not just be like, let's go goth. Although I love a goth moment. I wanted to like, I think that this is the divinity of life. This is the magic in life. This is what makes the magic in the mundane, is the acknowledgement that we don't get much time here and we get to do something wonderful with our time. And that makes it so precious, right? So sparkly. It's almost like you can see the magic in the air. So I'm really excited for this series, and I'm so delighted to introduce our first guest to you, Sofia Kohl. Sofia is a death worker, and I'm so grateful that we got introduced by Chelsea, her cousin. Chelsea is an amazing North Node member, and we had a really wonderful conversation. I'm eager to have Sofia back on the podcast, but we talked about her experience working in the death industry and working in the natural death industry and kind of what she's seen, because death has really been commoditized by capitalism. It was this sacred spiritual ritual, and in many cultures it didn't used to be just something that was associated with a religious practice. Everyone had a ritual around death, no matter what your spiritual belief. And now we don't really have that. We have expensive funerals that make people go bankrupt. We have $10,000 Cadillac coffins that are put into the earth with people who are embalmed in them that are never going to break down and are just going to take up space. And there's a lot that's happening in the industry of death and dying that is both advancing in a beautiful way and acknowledging giving back to the earth. And there's also a lot that happens in the death and dying industry that we talk about in this episode that's a little scary and a little Black Mirror, and that maybe keeps us even further away from acknowledging our humanity, from acknowledging our mortality. And how do we deal with that, especially as people who are all aging, whose parents are aging, and who death comes for us all. It's a great equalizer. So I'm really excited about this episode. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope it's interesting to you. And I am delighted by our guest speaker lineup. And so I hope that you enjoy this. Spooky season. Here we come. Hi, Sofia.
Hi, Michelle.
I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. We were connected through one of your family members and one of my, I feel like, spiritual family members, Chelsea, who's in North Node. And she actually connected us when she found out I was doing death doula training. And she was like, oh my God, you have to meet my cousin Sofia. You guys are going to hit it off. And we did. And I'm so just delighted to hear your perspective. And one of the things that struck me about our conversation was how holistically you look at not just the practical element and like experience of death, but also the spiritual and ritual experience of death, dying, and in turn life. So I think like the first question is like, how much Scorpio do you have in your chart to do what you do?
That is such a great question. And the answer is only my Pluto is in Scorpio.
Okay, but that makes sense.
So the rest is Pisces. You're picking up the Pisces. Aquarius Sun and Pisces Moon, Pisces Rising, Pisces Venus. Wow. So I kind of describe myself as like an air bubble inside of an ocean.
You're just floating to the surface.
Exactly.
That's, you know what? We have a lot in common because I also have a Pisces Venus. I'm a triple water and I have Pluto Scorpio too. So maybe there's something there.
There could be. Well, I think, right, we're were in the depths. At least I'll speak for myself. I came at death work and grief work from being so in the depths of like human emotion and the collective psyche, and being very, very overwhelmed and kind of like, okay, I need to look at this and I need to develop some tools in order to kind of learn how to have this shadowy domain that I'm exploring be something that I can kind of bring into the world and not just feel like I'm alone with it.
Yeah, I feel like that's a familiar experience for sure of anyone with really deep emotions. I'll speak as someone with depression, capital D depression. It's like one of the most muscular things, like one of the most muscular memories. Most of the muscular memories I have were like, they feel like the meatiest and hairiest or when I've been like in the depths of depression because I feel everything so deeply. And while it is excruciating, it also like reminds me of how alive I am. And I feel like that's one of the gifts of at least how I experience depression is like, whoa, I have such capacity to feel, but also it's like borderline untenable. It's like, how do people live with this depth of feeling? So I totally resonate with that. And what was your entry to holding those like intense emotions or that intense grief that you realized like, whoa, in order to survive, I need to learn how to move through this, as opposed to shutting it down, which I think most people do. It's just like put their grief in a closet and never look at it again.
I shut it down for a long time and still do. We have to a certain degree, but that is a great segue actually into kind of giving you a little bit of my story that I don't often give everyone when I'm being asked, oh, how did you get into death care, funeral service, which is that I also struggled with depression and anxiety. And in my teenage years, I was really suicidal. And I kind of started to look at my world and just really be like, what is going on here? And is there a way that I'm like trying to invert my experience, craving a sort of spiritual death, like basically craving surrender, and finding myself in all of these situations and in my life in which I was kind of looking around at the positivity that didn't seem to be matching. You know, that feeling where it's like, oh, it's just displacing kind of. And there's so many ways that people are displaced in our culture, but in the emotional way, it's like, oh, what I seem to be experiencing about reality isn't what's being reflected back at me. Initially, it was more of a conceptual entry, honestly, of what is this death denial and what is this toxic positivity?
I feel like you were a baby genius to be able to sort of like note that dissonance of toxic positivity at what it sounds like was a really young age. I don't know. I was an idiot up until I was like 28. I wouldn't have been an acknowledgement of that or awareness of that. Did you just know like there's something wrong here? Or was there like, I don't know, like some actual experience where you're like, wait, this is not right. Like, how did you figure that out?
I would not take credit for it. Like I would say that it was very much kind of like forced upon me by the universe in some sort of way. Like I had a very deep spiritual crisis where I couldn't function like in the world. Like I pulled away from my family. I pulled away from friends. I stopped going to school. Like I would get so like going to the grocery store, I would have panic attacks. And it just became this kind of, I have no choice but to be with this because like everything else was ripped away. And I feel like a lot of our human experiences is like we're dipping into things and then we're able to come out of them, and dipping in and kind of coming out. I couldn't come out was what it felt like. So I started just kind of working with some different practitioners who were able to kind of help me to see that this is what happens when trauma stacks up in our bodies and we're freezing them. Like it's this experience of like thinking that we need to go out in the world and be a certain way. And it's not always possible. So I really went through kind of 2 to 3 years solidly of just feeling like I had to be in that space. Hmm. And then I came out of that thinking, oh my gosh, wow, like how many people are falling apart and have no guidance?
Yeah. I think that the fact that you came out of it is like a miracle, you know, in a way. I don't think it's rare for people to just completely die to themselves or for a part of them to just be shut off. You know, it's like that castle analogy that like an entire wing is like locked to us of who we are and we just never get the key to access it again. And I think so many people who are on a spiritual journey are looking to unlock that door inside of themselves, but often escape through the top instead of unlocking and going deeper. And it's a bit of a common sort of idea in the spiritual space right now, which is ascension, right? Like I'm going to go meditate and be in Vipassana for 10 days and escape this, you know, bodily form and everything that is human and elevate and ascend and move beyond the human experience. And something that I wonder is like, maybe that's missing the whole point, because maybe the spiritual experience is being human. And I think that this idea of ascension and getting away, escaping, really is fear of death, right? And ignoring the divinity of life and death that are right next to each other. And like we always have access. It's so simple. We always have access to these two things. They're promised for everyone. And yet we like love to ignore them and pretend like they don't exist or they're not going to happen to us. How does that play into, or I guess, what do you think of that?
100%. I'm feeling everything you're saying. It feels so right on because even just, I love language. I love etymology and I love looking at just the ways that we speak about things and the subtle violences that can come up just in kind of the language around like you're going to conquer the darkness. And there's so many that probably aren't just going to drop into my mind right now, but there's so many ways that we talk to ourselves like that. And I deeply love the light and having more clarity and more purpose and more value and getting things done and, you know, all of these kinds of positive associations, they're wonderful. But darkness isn't in opposition to God, in my perspective. And when I say God, I really just mean like how I perceive the spiritual presence of the world that's in all things.
Yeah.
Darkness is not in opposition to that. It's half of it. And there's not a stopping point. We never arrive fully. We arrive in the moments with as much presence as we can muster, but we don't arrive at this kind of pinnacle point where all of our sorrows, our woes, our griefs, our visceral experiences that we go through as humans, we don't ever arrive at a place where that's fully gone. Mm-hmm. Of course, we should be trying to minimize people's suffering in the way that it's put on them by the world. But in terms of our own personal experiences, navigating that is beautiful. We're never going to be able to see past a certain boundary of our vision. Just like when we're in a womb, we're hearing, we're feeling vibrations, we're sensing in the ways that we can sense. And then everything else around that is a dark layer. And we come into this world and it's the same way. And I think that this feeling of like, we're going to conquer the unknown. We're going to be able to x-ray your body and see every single thing that's inside of it. And by doing that, we're going to be able to solve everything and live forever. Who knows? Maybe there is such thing as a heaven where there's no body and no boundaries and no darkness or whatever. But right now, I don't buy it. Yeah. So it's like from where I'm standing, it's the important work of being able to be more honest about how our lives come together with both of those elements.
I love that. And I think that what you're hitting on is like, I think the deep fear of most of us is that we're totally missing the point like of this whole thing, right? Yeah. And that's why death is scary, because it sort of is kind of like, well, did I miss the point? Or was I on the right track? Like, I hope that this wasn't a waste, or I don't know. And I want to ask you about duality and the binary of life and death. I know we're moving away from binary systems in general, kind of to what you were saying, which is we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what's out there. Maybe we can see this line and these 2 points on the line, right, that are dualistic in nature, but maybe we're actually just seeing part of a circle and we can only see a tiny little part of it, right? But not everything has been illuminated to us. We're so small in our understanding and capacity. When you think about the relationship between life and how do you think about it? Is it 2 halves of a whole, 2 opposite points? Is it 2 points that are next to each other and like commingled? How do you think of those 2 things?
I think most often I think of it like a spiral. If you look at a spiral drawn out, there will of course be a visible part where you're seeing where the person started drawing the line and then where they ended drawing the line. But really, if it were existing in 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional or 5-dimensional space, like it wouldn't be that way. It's something that's constantly twisting in and out of itself. And I don't feel like in my life I'm born and then I'm climbing this mountain and the mountain is going up and up and up until I have this one death at the end of my life, and then maybe that's like a decline or something. I think of it as kind of like waving up and waving down and experiencing many moments of, like you were saying earlier, oh, I'm dead to who I used to be now. And this kind of relates to social contracts too, because when you have those friends or people in your life where it's like, oh, I have to be this old version of myself. And that feels so weird.
Yeah.
Because we don't have that framework necessarily we are entitled to change and transform in so many ways. And it's an odd thing that we try to make up this appearance of everything being so solid, or so unchanging. And that's like the domesticated quality, right? Of like, I'm a fixed energy walking on this straight line through space.
Yes.
So if I were to think of a shape, I almost can't because it's like all the shapes and like, yeah, that was just my image in this moment, was a spiral.
I love that. I was a modern dancer, and so I took a lot of anatomy, and I went to school for it. So I took a lot of anatomy classes. And one of the things that struck me that my teacher always told me was that our body is made in spirals. Like, even like your arm, that's a spiral motion, but the way the muscles wrap on our body, like on our legs, they're all in spirals. And so when we're moving in a healthy way, we're not moving necessarily like so linearly. We are a spiral in and of ourselves. And we sometimes forget about that. I mean, it's our DNA. It's like a duh moment when you think about it. But I love the idea of like the life and death experience as this spiraling, also like in and out of the light. Because when the light shines on a spiral, some of it is illuminated and some of it isn't. It just depends on like the perspective that you're looking at it from. So,
oh my gosh, do you still dance?
I do. Yeah, I'm actually working on. I'm not like I don't perform, but my own art practice. What I'm working on right now is painting, and I choreograph a phrase. So I put together a movement phrase, and then I put all this paint on a giant canvas, and then I just do the motion over and over and over again, whatever the phrase is that I created. Because I'm thinking about like, what is repetition? What is the body moving through space? And even if I'm doing the same thing over and over again, it's always going to be different, and I can't get it back. And I can get some sort of like imprint of it when the paint is the ether, or the ether outside of me, but I'm never going to be able to totally capture it. So what is it like to maybe try and capture it from or essences of, I don't know, this same thing, this repetitive motion, but it's not repetitive. It's totally different each time. And I think that's kind of life too,
Yeah. Wow. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't want to force you to perform, but like, if you ever do and have a video or something, send it.
What if you just like made me do it on Zoom right now? You're like, show me you can dance. Yeah, but I loved being an artist and a professional artist, but I often found, especially as a modern dancer, postmodern dancer, where a lot of people don't have the language or the reference to understand what you're talking about, because we don't really teach art or dance especially, to the general population, that I couldn't help people as much as I wanted to with art. But like all art does is remind us of life. There are so many different ways to look at that. And when I stopped dancing was when I had a bunch of really like traumatic deaths happen in my life, and with like really complex people who were not just one thing, who weren't just like good and pure, but in their death, that's what they were reduced down to. Or in one example, it was kind of like, let's forget he ever existed. He was complex and let's just like put him away and never talk about him again. And I'm so curious about that, and that we do that over and over to each other, to the people that we love. We reduce them down to one core essence, right? And you kind of alluded to this earlier. We are not this one static thing. We are, I think, like when we know ourselves and who we truly are, instead of one root that you can reduce this down to, we're actually like this massive amoeba of like complexity and prism and color and feeling, right? And I wonder where that comes from, because I don't think that we've always treated death in that way. But I don't know. What do you think? I mean, you are such an expert in this, and you've been in this area for so long. I'd be so curious to hear your thoughts on the injustice of how we don't honor the full person at the end of their life.
It's one of those things that I feel, from my perspective, that is almost always intended well.
Mm-hmm.
It's intended to be, I'm remembering the beautiful things about this person.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different directions that I could go with this. Like, I have heard a lot of families, for example, who've come into the funeral homes that I've worked out and said, I don't want a viewing, which is fine.
Yeah.
Nobody has to spend time with a body. But the most commonly cited reason is that people want to remember this person as they were.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not only as they were in their like totality, but as they were in the most positive moments, the light of who they were. And it's interesting to me because it almost feels like we're hoping that once a person has died, that they are free of maybe some of the more complex parts of who they were. And I've seen spirits for long enough in my life, like starting from when I was a child, and I'm like, I'm not so sure about that. Like, I feel like whatever is existing in the energetic and the spiritual realm, however you want to look at it, like, to me, it's got to be just as complex as we are here as beings. Mm-hmm. And to be able to have those relationships be ongoing, like in a way saying, oh, I'm just going to remember the positive things about this person, is similar or is kind of side by side to this other thing of, I'm just going to forget that person exists. Mm-hmm. In that the ongoing relationship with, oh, if this person is still a spirit that has these different dimensions to them, maybe I could still talk to them as if they were still right here. And they still have those qualities. I think that there's a lot of opportunity even for, I mean, I don't know what your beliefs are around like ghosts or like the continuation of energy, how that happens.
Deeply believe in them. I see them all the time. Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, oh, a lot of the ghosts that I've experienced and spoken to is like, they're saying very human things. And it's almost like a conversation that's like, oh, this person just wanted to continue being spoken to or continue unfolding some trauma that happened or some historical memory that is still existing in that field. I think. So I feel that it's really important actually to continue to hold the totality of what could be possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that when we, like on the spiritual kick, when we talk to our ancestors or our spiritual team, sometimes we look to our ancestors as like these benevolent, all-knowing, wise entities that have the ultimate right answer and they're unselfish. But the truth is, like, they're just as human. They are just as like biased and maybe kind of fucked up and maybe toxic, honestly. And they're still part of your team, right? Like you get to be in conversation with them. And that is, I wonder if this comes from Christianity and religion and the sort of puritanical nature of like higher power or elders or patriarchy knowing better than we do, and how that sort of like flowed into our lives and how we grieve and how we sort of elevate people once they aren't here with us anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think about that a lot. I think about the intersections of capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, and and how all these kind of mentalities blend together to essentially tell us like this story of how things are that keeps the world going as it goes.
Yeah.
Which isn't a good thing always, or most of the time maybe. I think a lot about how capitalism as a system has no space for death because death doesn't produce. Yes. Right? It's literally like the antithesis of production. Yes. It's a time when everything halts and when we're beyond the known, beyond things that we can use as materials or tools to like make something that's profitable. So grief is a very like dangerous rebellion, I guess, against, and then there's like all the languaging around hysteria, and any display of kind of like feeling deeply is put into that category too. It's funny when I talk about death, I'm like, wow, this is hard to talk about because death doesn't speak English.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I love that you brought in capitalism, obviously, because we love to be capitalism critical here. And my experience of grief has been, it has no like calendar date. You can't be like, yeah, I'm going to grieve for the next 5 days and then I'm going to be cool and come back to work and be totally productive. It just like strikes when it feels like it. And it can be 10 years after the fact. And all of a sudden you're like on your knees with grief and it just comes out of nowhere, and that keeps you on your toes. But I used to work in tech, and I've been so curious as to why death as an industry isn't something that has been disrupted by tech in a really big way yet, because that's what tech is all about, right? It's disrupting a huge industry and the one that touches the most people, and that would certainly be death because it comes for all of us. Something that's been really freaking me out lately is new AI that's been created. I don't know if you saw the Anthony Bourdain, there's a recent documentary that came out, and the creators actually made a deep fake of him speaking. So they were able, because there's so much media from him, and actually now all of us, they were able to recreate his voice exactly and have him read, quote unquote, an email that he had written exactly with his intonation. And you couldn't tell when you're watching the documentary that it wasn't actually him recording it, that it was this deep fake AI generated voice. And it's really caused like an ethics kerfuffle in the documentary space and also in the AI space around what's appropriate and what's not, and our relationship to technology. And I've read some stories recently around people who have taken, this man in particular, his girlfriend died. He took her Instagram, her emails, her blog, her YouTube channel. He fed it into AI, into an algorithm. And now he texts with her and talks to her on the phone based on all this data, which like totally gave me full body chills in a freaky way. Yeah. And is able to talk to her every day and have conversations with her that are brand new because this algorithm has this information from who she was. And there are these theme parks that they're thinking of building in Japan where you could go visit a loved one who's passed on, where you upload their consciousness from their computer, from their social media, and you can go have these conversations with them. You can even see like a computer generated version of them. And I'm like, wouldn't it just be easier if we just acknowledge death and grieving? I don't know, right? Like what, but how interesting. What do you think of all that?
That is so tricky, Michelle. I had a dream once that like, I actually won't go into the details because it was kind of disturbing. Like it was a blend of like AI and embalming. Mm-hmm. It was like, there was like a new technology that for embalming, which as of right now, embalming isn't permanent, right? Like it offsets decomposition, but it doesn't completely make it go away forever. But there was like this some kind of treatment that basically made it like kind of a forever thing. Whoa. And then there was an AI that was like actually uploaded into this like embalmed body that was like part robotic that could.
That's like a Black Mirror episode. There was kind of an episode like that where the girl had a robot of her partner that was like fleshy, and like they uploaded his consciousness to it. And yeah.
I just like here's the thing. Here's what I think about that. We could possibly exist forever in a digital space in a way we kind of already are.
I was going to say, we already do. We do kind of exist forever. Like,
and right now we're kind of split. Like, we still have these like physical lives, but if we don't continue to be embodied, that's just going to exist. But then humanity is going to be extinct because we live on an earth that needs matter, right? Like that literally feeds on matter to recycle itself and to continue creating the trees and the plants and the food and the air and the water that is feeding us. And to bring it like back to capitalism a little bit, is my issue isn't with production. I love to be productive. My issue is like that in order to have balance, we have to be in reciprocity, which not only means like going into our own emotional lows, but also on a physical level. Like our bodies have to die and our bodies have to go back into the whole, just like the plants in our garden do. And otherwise, like, it doesn't matter how alive we can keep ourselves through technology, because the earth doesn't produce forever. It needs the right? It needs the re in front of production, which is like, that's the medicine of, and I'm not like super clear on how I think in terms of the binary, but with a feminine principle, I think of birth and death as kind of more that giving into something or giving back, death as giving back what we've been given, which is life.
Yeah, it strikes me that, capitalism as we practice it now is just this extractive process, right? That doesn't pour back into, it's not regenerative, to use the it's all about taking. And we don't notice the effects of it until it's like incredibly painful, right? Until, all of a sudden, like we literally can't grow things here anymore and we have to move somewhere else. And then even then we kind of numb ourselves to the side effects or like the effects of our actions. And it reminds me a little bit of this, like this perspective on death of, well, how can I sort of alleviate the grief or pain so I just don't feel it? So I don't feel it and I don't need to feel it. I can kind of create a balm for myself so that I can be extracted or so I can continue producing. Even how we do this with our physical bodies with things like plastic surgery and anti-aging, it's almost as if we're putting this veneer on to protect ourselves from the inevitable, even though we know the inevitable is on the other side. It's like there's something about it that we think if we can just paint over it, it will go away, or we won't have to deal with the effects of it. But inevitably we will, because that's life, and that's the life and death. It's a cycle. It's not like an endless, journey upwards.
Yeah. So do you know much about embalming?
I don't know a lot about embalming, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people who would want to hear more about it.
Yeah. So I studied embalming, and I want to preface this by saying that I know firsthand some really, really wonderful embalmers who do great work and who are giving families what they're asking for. And so what I'm going to say conceptually, like, has nothing to do with the individuals. It's more of like the framework from which it arose out of, which kind of emerged during the Civil War to get soldiers home, like fallen soldiers home when there weren't cars. You're traveling cross country in some cases on horseback, and there needed to be some kind of procedure to keep people intact so that the families could have access to their bodies to say goodbye. Because it's very well known that having access to a body and being able to say goodbye to someone's physical form is like deeply healing and really necessary in many cases. But then quickly after that, it kind of became this, you don't have to decompose. You can remain this relic of yourself. And I've literally heard families say, I don't want the worms to get to mom. And so there's some kind of psyche of human worm, human earth that we're trying to keep ourselves in this sheltered little box where the elements aren't going to get to us. But why? I think of it as being quite selfish. Why are we so resistant to letting ourselves not be ourselves anymore, even after death? letting ourselves become a part of a larger ecosphere. Like, it's not about ego identity anymore. It's not even about like, oh, I lost this person. I didn't want to lose this person, so I'm going to pretend like they're still alive. It's also like, well, did the person who died give you consent to keep them alive forever as this like past version of themselves? There's a lot of directions it could go, but basically it's like this holding of our human identity.
You could interpret that in so many different ways, of being so married to some version of someone, some like nostalgic take or perspective on who a person was and how, like, yeah, did they consent to that, to be reduced down to that thing, or to you holding them in that way? And to me, just says we don't know how to grieve. And I think the ritual and the rite, like the actual, like the rite of passage of grief, has been really stripped away from us, probably from capitalism, but also just because, like, as we are more detached from our bodies, as we can move into computers and distract ourselves with the world around us, these rites of passage that we go through that are part of life, that are sacred, they become less and less important, especially as we move away from our own cultural identities, as we forget where we've come from, as we take on other people, appropriate other people's practices. We lose touch with that, and how that does connect us to our humanity.
Yeah, I feel like there's an actual ecological morality to dying, and it's just popped into my head. I don't know if you've heard of Marion Woodman.
No.
She's like a depth psychologist who wrote
cool.
through archetypes and kind of like journeys, of connecting with different archetypes. And one of the quotes that has stuck with me for like so many years, I probably read her books like 5 or 6 years ago, was to remain in a fixed position is to rot, especially if it be in the Garden of Eden.
Ooh, that's good.
There's so much in there. Yeah. Yeah. But it's like, because the movement, the like, oh yeah, we're letting ourselves change. We're letting ourselves, even if that means not being ourselves anymore, like we're letting ourselves go through that, because movement is life. Yes.
Yes. And it's okay to not like it. You know, circling back to toxic positivity, it's okay to like want to be the old version of yourself, to like grieve that person, right? And be like, fuck, that was cool when I was them, but I'm not them anymore. And we don't give ourselves that. We don't give ourselves the option to be unhappy, to like be dissatisfied. We are just looking for contentment and that, again, that balm. And there is a lot of value in being dissatisfied, and a lot of like lesson there, but it sucks.
It does. And I hear you there. It's not comfortable.
I feel like we're going to have a multi-parter, because we didn't even really get into like the spirituality around death and a funeral experience, or the ritual or rite of death rites. And I want to talk to you more about that. But Sofia, how can people find you and work with you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, well, I am not a huge social media user. I never have been, mostly because, I do have a personal page. It's Sofia, Sofia Kohl, Kohl. Right now, I'm at like a precipice of, in the next couple of months, launching my business, which is going to be sort of holistic care for end of life. In hospice care, funeral care are totally separate from each other.
Yes.
And that's not how I like to do things. I like to work with people on a more of a in-depth scale of time. So it's going to be kind of from pre-death through post-death.
Cool.
Just being kind of in these journeys with people. And who knows, it'll probably adapt before I talk to you next. But if you follow my personal Instagram, I will post my business there and my new page once it goes live.
Perfect. Well, in the meantime, we'll be tuning in just to hear your brilliant thoughts, because you're just a wellspring of knowledge and self-knowledge. And I'm so happy that people like you exist and that you're doing the work that you do, because it's, I think, one of the most important things in the world. And it's one of also like the things that we want to forget about, and we never want to think about until it's actually happening to us. And then we're like, fuck, I wish there was someone like Sofia that existed. And the good news is that you do exist.
Well, I want to tell everyone to please talk to me, because like being in death work can sometimes feel like an island. I'm like, gosh, maybe I should just make beautiful graphics so it helps to be like, oh yeah, people are curious about this. And thank you so much, Michelle. I admire you so much. It's always amazing to hear you be able to engage with such a wide span of topics and connect with so many people. And it's like you're somehow carrying this thread of community connection, and it's really inspiring. So.
Oh, well, thank you. It was such a joy to talk to you. Okay, that's it. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I just can't wait to hear what you think. And I mentioned that I'm going through death doula training, and I got so many amazing comments on Instagram about it. And I would love to hear from you about what you think, how you relate to death, how it shows up in your life. And, you know, we don't have to be Debbie Downer. You can totally be Debbie Downer though. Trust me, all your feelings are valid. If you got through this episode and you were like, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this episode because death is really scary for me, I just want to give you a big hug virtually. Big hug. Yay. And say congrats, you did it. And keep that curiosity, my friends. That's what the 12th house is all about. Honestly, as long as you stay rooted in who you are and you trust yourself, you can navigate any dark sea. And I'll leave you with that. Okay. Have a good rest of your week. Talk to you Friday.